deadly act of alleged road rage, all caught on camera. Police say this mom was killed celebrating her birthday. Her 19-year-old daughter is now in the ICU fighting for her life. And here are the alleged killers. Police say they're a boyfriend-girlfriend duo now in custody after allegedly firing nearly a dozen bullets at the victim's car. All of this stemming from a traffic dispute. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. A day of celebration and joy quickly turned to fear and tragedy on the roads of Panama City, Florida, all because a suspect allegedly decided to take out their anger over a traffic dispute with violence. But before we get to those suspects and their background, I want to start and bring attention to the victims in this story. These are people who police say had no previous history with their alleged attackers. This is 48-year-old Georgeann Garner and her 19-year-old daughter, Marileigh Lewis. On Saturday, February 22nd, police say Georgeann was celebrating her birthday. She was out with friends and family at a local Mardi Gras parade. And as they left that parade, police say they got into some sort of traffic dispute with people in another vehicle at this intersection in Panama City. Police say the people in that other vehicle started verbally harassing those in Georgeann's car. Then, as you see here in a freeze frame from this video that's been circling on social media, you can see the passenger in the pickup truck pull out a gun, point it out the window, and then open fire. Both Georgeann and her daughter Marileigh were taken to the hospital, and that is where Georgeann passed away. According to this GoFundMe page, at the time of this recording, it's raised more than $14,000. It says that Marileigh is still in critical condition. It's been giving updates on her condition. It reads that she's currently on a ventilator and, quote, fighting for her life. This GoFundMe page also says that Georgeann was a single mom with 2 kids and, quote, her eyes twinkled when she laughed and glittered when she snorted. She was taken from us far too quickly, and her life was ended by ruthless people with road rage whose hearts were full of hate. Let's talk about what played out on the road, because police say that there were bystanders that came in to try and help Georgeann and Marileigh and the 2 other people who were in their vehicle who were not hit by the gunfire. Then that Dodge pickup truck that the bullets allegedly came from took off. This is what police said about the chase in video posted by WMBB TV. Take a listen.
The officer pursued that vehicle north on Highway 231, eventually landing in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn near the intersection of Highway 231 and Highway 77. The vehicle continued to attempt to flee officers, eventually ramming one of our units.
Eventually, these 2 people were taken into custody. Their names, Jubal Simmons and Ivybella Encino. Police say Encino was the one behind the wheel, and Simmons was allegedly in the passenger seat and is the one who pulled out the gun and opened fire. Simmons was arrested after he allegedly jumped out of the car and tried to run for himself. We looked into the social media of these 2, and on Facebook it shows that they were in a relationship, posting several pictures together, but now they're in custody and both facing serious charges. They also, ironically perhaps, posted pics together with filters, putting devil horns on their head. Police say these 2 didn't know who was in the car that they allegedly fired upon, just that they were having some sort of traffic dispute, a case of road rage. They had no prior history with these victims. They say that Simmons just pulled out a gun and fired nearly a dozen rounds into the car that had Georgeann and Marileigh inside. They also hit another vehicle that was out on the road. This case forever changing the lives of the people who were inside that car, taking the life of a mom who's just out celebrating with her family. Police say Simmons is facing charges, including 1 count of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Here's his picture in the Bay County Jail where he's being held without bond. His girlfriend, Ivybella Encino, also facing serious charges, including accessory to murder. Remember, police say she was the one behind the wheel of the vehicle. Joining us now is attorney John Phillips with experience in civil and criminal litigation based in Florida. I know you have looked into this case as well. I mean, it's just tough video to watch, knowing how a day changes from being one of celebration to then just the horror that took place. What do you see when you watch that video?
It's horrible. You know, to your point, you know, you've got somebody literally traveling with their daughter on their birthday, kind of the perfect day, right? And then you just, things escalate and escalate to the point of road rage and a mass, not quite mass shooting, but the shooting of two people, one fatal. And, unfortunately, doing civil and criminal litigation, we see this all too often. It's happening more and more as people just become so impulsive.
Yeah.
But it's truly tragic.
How does the law look when a case is prosecuted like this, where it's not a murder that was calculated or planned? It was an alleged murder that happened because he was upset about some, I'm sure in the grand scheme of everything, minor traffic issue. Someone cut somebody off, let's just say, and then spur of the moment decides to use his gun to take the life of somebody else.
Yeah, in Florida, we've seen it multiple ways. So typically one would think you would get, a non-first degree murder charge because there isn't premeditation as one would expect. But then we have the Jordan Davis case, which I was involved with, 10 years ago, where a jury did say, and a prosecutor and police force, aggressively pursued premeditation based upon, seconds. It doesn't have to be an overnight planning under Florida law. And here, there was a gap between, all the arguing and the shooting. And I think, police and prosecutors certainly could get a grand jury involved and see if they want to pursue, first degree murder here.
Yeah, 'cause that's fascinating because, yeah, part of it was that there was some sort of verbal altercation. You have the traffic incident, verbal altercation, then the shots are fired. How could what is said in that verbal altercation, if they can get details of what was said between the two parties, how could that factor into what a prosecution could look like?
Yeah, so you're going to be looking at it from the standpoint of self-defense, stand your ground, what fear of self or others were the perpetrators essentially, facing. And again, everything from the reports I've seen is there was no imminent threat to bodily harm. There was no gun. There was nothing in the car that would have provoked fatal self-defense. And so if you don't have fatal self-defense, you have an impulsive shooting based upon, circumstances stemming from, the operation of motor vehicles, which doesn't warrant force, right?
Right.
It's not like you have video of them trying to run over this person. And so he had to shoot his way out of a problem. This isn't a stand your ground case. I don't see a viable, self-defense, argument here. It's the worst kind of reaction where you're not happy and you take people's lives.
Yeah, it's awful. And the narrative that police have laid out. And I just think of this suspect, the shooter. Well, I want to talk about the driver in the moment, but the alleged shooter, they have this video. He's in the passenger seat and they say, he's the one who fired the shots. And you watch the video, you zoom in, you can see the handgun being pointed out the window. If you were his defense attorney, what argument do you have now that he's in custody? And you certainly have this video that paints the picture of exactly what he allegedly did.
You're going to try to do anything you can, in Jordan Davis's case, which is the one I'm referring to, that we kind of got a novel first degree murder, case out of it. It was, I thought they were going to shoot back, or I thought he was going to shoot me. And his last words to me were that they were going to run me down. And, anytime you shoot a victim and kill a victim, they can't defend themselves. Now you do have the daughter who's in the hospital and appears that she will recover, but they're going to throw anything they can against the wall. But I think this was 10 or 11 shots.
11, according to police. Yeah.
Yeah. This is, between shot 1 and shot 11 is a significant amount of time where, again, you could find a jury that would say, all right, maybe shot 1 wasn't premeditated, but by the time you're unloading a clip, you're there, you're intending to kill.
The girlfriend of the alleged shooter, she was apparently behind the wheel. She also fled, and there was a brief police chase. She's charged with accessory to murder. I feel like there are cases where you see the person who might be driving, who is in some ways an accessory to murder. that they get hit with the murder charge as well. What do you make of how she's being charged, and what type of punishment could she see for being the person behind the wheel?
Yeah. So people think of accessory in two ways. There's before the fact and after the fact, right? And here, I think there might be both. So there was argument, there was escalation before the shots were fired. So what was her role in that? Did she say shoot their tails, whatever? But we can see accessory after the fact, which is where you have a shooting and you don't, you think of stand your ground. You don't stand your ground. You flee like a coward and try to get away with it. And trying to get away with murder in Florida is often prosecuted up there with murder, because you are trying to, help somebody get away with taking somebody else's life. And, the police actually, and I do civil rights work too, exercised extreme restraint, because oftentimes when you have a fleeing felon, who's killed somebody, police can take lives into their hands too. And the fact that they were peacefully detained, says something for local law enforcement.
How could her punishment compare to her boyfriend's if he's found guilty? He's charged with murder. You assume that's life. But for her being accessory to murder, what type of time could she be looking at?
It really depends on their role and how complicit she was with the directions and participation in either the murder or the getaway. But you're looking at, 20, 30-year sentences all the way up to where they essentially, and again, it depends on whether they're charging this as so in Florida, capital murder, capital rape, first degree murder, first degree, sex crimes come through a grand jury. In the federal system, pretty much everything comes through a grand jury, but prosecutors and police have a lot more discretion in states. And so it really depends, is this a first degree or a second degree murder case, as to what she could carry. But jurors and judges have thrown the absolute book and given an equivalent sentence to somebody who's helping perpetrate or get away from a murder, just as if you participated in it.
I also want to note as well, here's this couple, and we looked at their Facebook pages, and they, they're in every picture together, and they look like this couple that's truly in love. But then, of course, in the run, he ditched her. He ran on his own, left her behind in the car, according to what police said. These victims, at the time of this recording, the 19-year-old daughter, she's on a ventilator, she's in the ICU. There's a GoFundMe page raising money. I don't know what their insurance situation looks like, but obviously that cost of care is significantly high. What avenues can a family take, assuming that these perpetrators, if found guilty, that they don't have a lot of money, but where could they potentially, is there any path that they could take to get some sort of damages, to be able to pay for the medical bills and for what life potentially could look like going forward?
Most of the work that I do is representing victims of violence or negligence, find recovery. And in this case, it is dismal at best. You've got the GoFundMe, so you've got the court of public opinion, so to speak, that can help. Florida has terrible laws related to auto insurance. We actually don't mandate bodily injury insurance. Some states have like minimum $25,000 policies. Florida does not. And so, if there was an auto policy, an auto insurance policy, there could be some recovery there. But again, you're talking about, this wasn't a car wreck. This was a shooting. So you've got intentional acts exclusions, and you better believe every insurance carrier is going to say, no, we're not paying this one. Even in Jordan Davis's case, where Michael Dunn shot Jordan Davis, the car insurance was like, no. And I was like, but their automobiles were related, and you really don't want to have to defend this guy. And they paid their policy limit. So it does happen. But, that's kind of phase two. Oftentimes people like this, and you can kind of tell from their pictures, don't have a tremendous amount of assets. So getting a personal judgment, is almost not worth the paper it's printed on. And finally, during the criminal process, courts will award restitution, but again, there's no amount of money that they could pay that's going to replace the loss of a mother, the loss of
Sure.
the medical bills from being you know dealing with this type of injury, being shot. There's never going to be a balance of economic recovery and the type of loss. You just hope that you can substantiate some. It's often horrible.
So in many cases, I mean, in this one, and again, I don't know their insurance situation. I mean, you end up getting shot, no fault of your own, and then you potentially could be stuck with, short of a GoFundMe page that raises a lot of money or donations. I mean, massive medical bills for your care, not even to mention if you have injuries that take a lot of outpatient therapy for the rest of your life. I mean, it's just kind of like you're the victim of this, but then it's almost like financially you're victimized again.
The victimization of the victim is exactly how we refer to it. The bell keeps ringing regardless of whether there's anybody there to help. And so, just yesterday we had a case where a woman was injured in a boating incident, and she doesn't, her deductible to get the surgery she needs is 5 figures. Well, people don't carry cash and don't plan for $10,000 copays and deductibles in order to get treatment when they didn't expect to be injured. And so here, fortunately, ERs will sustain lives and give treatment and write off bills and help. But it's what happens once you're out of the hospital with the need for rehabilitative therapy. Sometimes people need to learn to walk again. It depends on where she was shot. And then, you don't have in America's healthcare system, any real relief. And it's just a perpetuating disaster, all because somebody was impulsively, addressing a road rage incident with violence.
Yeah, it truly, changes lives forever, just a matter of minutes. And I know you've talked about where you feel like you're seeing more of these types of cases, the impulse cases, someone deciding to solve something with violence. And, there's a whole discussion to be had, and I'm sure it would get political in some ways, depending on who you talk to about like what's the source of all the of those impulses and just where we're at as a society. But I think from a legal perspective, when it comes to road rage, what in your mind could be done to almost prevent these situations from happening?
There's got to be, better state or federal even legislation to regulate people, which again flies in the face of what all of us want, which is for people to act reasonable without the government making them. But when the world is changing every couple of years with our access to technology, the importance of our opinion, on social media, and the access to guns. And I'm a Second Amendment, guy. I own firearms, but if people are going to carry them around and shoot their way out of traffic accidents and movie loudness or a host of church disputes, a host of other things on top of what we're seeing is gun manufacturers now marketing to unsound minds. We're regressing as a civilization because we were almost too free to do what we want.
Yeah, and you think if both cars had just driven away, if that the car that the alleged shooter was in, no matter what happened on the road, whatever the traffic issue was, if you just drove away, probably 30 seconds later, you would have forgot about it. And it's so difficult to see how this story played out. They were arrested on February 22nd when all of this took place. What's the timeline look like in these types of murder cases from now to potentially when we could see a conviction?
So, they have the right to speedy trial under state law as well as federal law. Typically they could move this thing to trial by the summer. Usually some level of delay advantages the defendant, and is something that they ask for. You want to make sure that the state is is prosecuting a case and moving things along, and not taking years. But on the same token, you got to come up with a defense here,
Right.
and I imagine if all else fails, there's going to be some psychological and mental evaluations to determine the sanity, whether because it's a real defense or because they don't have anything else to pursue. But you should see this thing escalate, in the justice system by summer, fall.
Florida is a death penalty state. Is this the type of case that could reach that bar?
It's a close call to me. To get the death penalty, you've got to show a level of maliciousness or premeditation, and I don't know enough to say that it's there. I know, and I've opined so far this morning, the amount of time that it took to go from argument to shooting, and the way that this happened, and the first shot to the 11th shot. I think there is a grand jury that would find first degree murder, which then could be a definite death penalty case. Prosecutors here, savvy prosecutors, do ask the family. They kind of gauge their town, but this is one of those that you do need to send a strong, clear message that shooting your way out of a motor vehicle, argument is not okay, and will be prosecuted to the letter of the law, and as extreme as possible.
I had one other question that just kind of crossed my mind, because I think of the stand your ground law, which just as a general public, certainly since Trayvon Martin, more people are just aware that that law exists in the state of Florida. Are jurors now, when someone, presumably they show this video in court, and if you're a defense lawyer, you might try to make the stand your ground self-defense law or argument. Are jurors more aware of that law? Does the I was trying to defend myself argument, how has kind of the awareness around those laws, and maybe just the awareness of these types of cases, have you seen impact a jury pool and just a juror's knowledge when it comes to some of these cases and how they see things?
Yeah, 2010 to 2015, in Florida, you had Trayvon Martin, and then you had Jordan Davis, who was the loud music
Yeah.
shooting. Certainly people were more aware of stand your ground then, and frankly, neither George Zimmerman nor Michael Dunn, neither one of those shooters had a typical stand your ground hearing where it was affirmative defense. So under Florida law, police are told not to arrest, prosecutors are told not to prosecute, and judges are told not to mandate cases to a jury where there's bona fide stand your ground. There's multiple options to review it. And then Florida's still kind of weird in that it has the term stand your ground in its jury instructions for self-defense, which sometimes confuses jurors. But, you can't be the aggressor under stand your ground law and use stand your ground. And I think that's the key here, is that, they're going to show at all times, Mr. Simmons and his partner were the ones provoking this, and the aggressors, which would completely end any entitlement to stand your ground. Jurors are kind of aware of it, but once it comes to a jury trial, it evolves from really stand your ground to self-defense, because it's really up to stand your ground's a legal question.
Yeah, no, certainly so. And we don't know what the defense will be. Police have definitely laid out a narrative that paints what appears to be a pretty clear picture about what happened at that intersection in Panama City last weekend. John Phillips, thank you for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate your perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let's dive a little further into this story. Joining me now, Kyle Schoberg, a police sergeant in Northern California. Always great to have you here on Law&Crime, even when it is for stories as difficult as the one we're talking about today. What's your reaction, especially seeing that video of the moment that these gunshots were fired?
It's another tragic story of an innocent life being taken, and thankfully, hopefully her daughter recovers from this. But, Earlier we were just talking before the show, and it's sad to say that these things happen more often than people think. And what it boils down to in these road rage type incidents is people don't know how to control their emotions, and emotional intelligence is a real thing, and it's important. And I tell people all the time when they get involved in these types of incidents, you don't know who you're getting involved with. And so a simple honk of a horn, or maybe flipping somebody off because you're upset somebody cut you off, or whatever the case may be. In this case, it led to a tragic murder of a mother. And, we, in law enforcement, we do deal with these types of calls. And sometimes, people get brutally beaten, they get attacked, all over a minor traffic violation. And so I encourage everybody, if you're involved in some type of incident, a road rage incident, you need to just keep on your way. And if people behave in this type of manner, they follow you, they swerve at you, they're honking at you. These are all indicators that something bad may happen if you pull over and engage with this person. So we tell people, call 911, drive to the nearest police station, get away from these people as fast as you can. They're very volatile and extremely dangerous. And in this case, we see that.
Yeah, and to think if everybody had just driven away, probably 30 seconds later, you wouldn't even have remembered what that moment was. I mean, as somebody's, you've responded to these types of cases. I guess in your experience, when you talk to someone who might be a suspect in a case like this, and we don't know in this particular instance what that person would say, but I mean, what typically do they say in these moments? Maybe not someone who's just murdered someone, but someone who's the aggressor after a road rage case like this.
Well, I've been involved in several of these, and I can remember vividly as a patrol cop responding to one where 4 people were shot in a vehicle, 2 of them were killed, and a day later the suspect was apprehended. And what it boiled down to was he felt disrespected by these people who cut him off, flipped him off. He was also with his girlfriend at the time. And, depending on who you're dealing with, sometimes, people do take that as a sign of disrespect. All sorts of different things. And so, and some people have the mindset, they're not going to allow that to happen, whether they're with their friends, girlfriend, wife, whatever. And so that's why I say you don't know who you're dealing with in these types of situations. But I have dealt with several of these. Some of them have turned into shootings. I've been to one where a guy was brutally attacked with a hatchet over someone cutting him off. And so, like I said, your best bet is to drive away as fast as you can. And you just said it. By the next stoplight or intersection, you're probably over it anyways. So that's the sad part about all this. And typically people act out of emotion and rage. And so, of course, most of the time they're apologetic. They instantly regret it. And it's crazy to think that in a matter of less than a minute, sometimes 30 seconds, your life can be drastically changed over something so minor.
In your experience, have the suspects ever shown regret and have this? I just would imagine, like, if you're in that moment of just pure rage, you do this, and then, that 30 seconds later, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe what I just did.
All the time. And not just cases like this, but more oftentimes than not in cases where someone lost their cool, lost their emotion, either hurt somebody or even killed somebody. Usually, there's a lot of regret behind that because they now know that they potentially could be going to prison for the rest of their life and they just took someone's life. And so they have to live with that. So a lot of times, yes, there is a lot of regret, remorse, all of those things.
Yeah. And I think of the police officer who was really right in the chase to bring this couple into custody. And what goes through your mind when you're in a chase like this, especially having just witnessed someone who fired roughly a dozen bullets into a car, knowing that you have to go after that person, they're armed, they may be in a heightened state of emotion. What do you make of how police officers handle this situation?
Well, to be in that situation, it's incredibly scary. And in my current job, we do a lot of violent fugitive apprehension. So people that have been involved in shootings, homicides, and so forth, and we go after them. And as a patrol cop, knowing you are, in a vehicle pursuit with somebody that had just committed this crime, you don't know what their mind state is, but you do know for sure that they are armed with a weapon. And so I always say the scariest part of being in a vehicle pursuit isn't necessarily the pursuit itself. It's always the end of the pursuit because you don't know what's going to happen. Generally, 3 things are going to happen. That's 1, the people are going to surrender and give up. 2, it's fight, flight, or freeze, right? So they're going to flee from you and try to run on foot, which in this case, this is what he did. or number three, they're going to fight it out with you. And that's maybe get out, shoot it out with you. I've been in multiple officer involved shootings where that has occurred, and that's incredibly terrifying. And so
Yeah.
as these things are unfolding, there's a lot of emotions in play. People are acting erratically. They're not thinking clearly. And sometimes when you corner people who have just committed a heinous act like that, that's a scary situation to be in, because you don't know what their response is going to be. And so it is incredibly scary. Pursuits are very dangerous. And like I just said, the end of a pursuit is always going to be the scariest moment of the entire situation.
For those of us who are on the outside, I mean, we see the video of the shots that were fired. You see the mug shots of the suspects who are in custody. And unfortunately, we know who the victims are in this case. But when you're doing an investigation, you're building a case. What are some of the other questions that you would look at now, knowing that both are in custody, but you're still trying to piece together exactly what happened?
Well, I mean, all you can do is just kind of go back in time and figure out who they are, what are they involved in, what is their criminal past, was he legally allowed to be in possession of a firearm, and just kind of build your case on that. And really, what motive of him doing this? Do you want to find out, did they know each other? Did they not know each other? Are they complete strangers? There's just a whole list of things that investigators are going to have to go back and kind of piece together, write search warrants for their residence, all sorts of things. And so that's all going to get packaged, put together, and then presented to the district attorney to proceed with the charges that they filed against them.
One thing I noticed, Kyle, in how the chase part of this played out, because the suspects, according to social media, I mean, every single picture they post is them together. But then they're in this chase. She's allegedly driving. He's in the passenger seat. And he hit it. He hopped out of the car and ran on his own. I mean, how often do you see that dynamic play out where, this couple that seemingly is in love until you're in that police chase, and then suddenly someone, it's all, every man for himself.
Yeah, well, like we say, you're in love until you're caught by the police, and then it's every man for himself. And so again, sadly, that does happen. Where it really becomes sad is when you see this type of behavior happen and there's kids involved, or there's kids in the car, and we've been in car chases where they've just left their kids, ran on foot trying to get away. And that is incredibly sad to me. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. You could look at, sure, maybe they think they're in love, and then this happens and he's leaving her now on her own, and she was driving the car. She rammed the cops. She's trying to get him away. And so, yeah, I mean, there's not much to say other than, yes, it happens. And it's pretty pathetic that, you're leaving your loved one behind to fend for themselves while you're running away from the cops.
Yeah, and I just think too, I know we talked about, how do we avoid these situations, because it does seem to happen so often. And when you have someone who might be short-tempered and they're carrying a firearm, that's never a recipe for success. But is there anything that can be done, whether it's charges filed, I mean, anything beyond just the kind of taking a deep breath at a traffic stop that can prevent, or a traffic light that could just prevent these types of incidents that happen?
Again, I'm going to circle back to emotional intelligence, and people really need to have an understanding of that, and really be able to control yourselves, your emotions, your anger, all of it. Sometimes, people are in such a hurry all the time, especially in today's world. And, someone might cut you off. Maybe somebody didn't use their blinker, or they're not paying attention. They're on their phone. All of these things play a factor into what annoy us in your everyday routine in driving. You got to look past that. Sometimes give people grace. You don't know what people are going through. And at the end of the day, if you are caught up in a situation like this where somebody is upset with you because maybe you've upset somebody based on your driving behavior, again, I can't stress it enough. Don't get involved in these types of things. They never tend to turn out well. Keep driving. If someone pursues you, follows you, they're escalating it, you need to call 911. Don't pull over. Drive to if you can, the nearest police station or a public parking lot, somewhere to try to get away from these people, but do not confront them.
And you brought up the point of disrespect, because I feel often, whether it's a road rage case, or even if it's just a shooting where someone said something to somebody, a bar fight, how do we, and this is more maybe a philosophical question that's impossible to answer, but to push through that particular part of all of it, how do you handle that when you feel disrespected? And it just seems like that is at the crux of so many of these stories that we talk about.
Well, I just think it depends on the individual, right? I can go to a bar, get disrespected by somebody, maybe because through alcohol or whatever the case may be. And I'm somebody that can brush that off, understanding that I'm not going to put myself in a bad situation. Maybe I'm just going to leave, right? There are some people out there, especially people involved in gangs and these types of things, where being disrespected is a huge, that's just not going to happen in their world. And so they are taught that if that happens, that they need to deal with it. And so oftentimes that's when you see these shootings, fights, and things like that break out. And people just can't look past the part of being disrespected, especially in front of their friends. And in law enforcement, you also have to be careful when you are dealing with people of that culture, not to do that in front of their friends, because now you're bringing problems to yourself when you're trying to deal with somebody. And so, in the law enforcement world, we'll kind of bring those people aside to get them away from their friends, have those hard conversations with them. But we're doing it away from them because we know that they don't want to be disrespected. And so we tend to separate the two. But in a public environment, again, you don't know who you're dealing with. And what might be okay to me or you being disrespected, it may not go very well for somebody else, and they will take action on that. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, no, it's really important to think about that. This is such a sad case. It was, people celebrating, and then suddenly, one thing leads to another. And we'll see now how the criminal charges and the legal system play out. Kyle Schoberg, always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Again, there are serious charges facing these two suspects. Simmons, the alleged shooter, is being held without bond. As for the driver of that vehicle, according to police, his girlfriend, Ivybella Encino, she is being held on more than $1 million bond. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops. For On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.